Adrian, I'm just doing a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes. I realize typically we have a slide deck to share. I'm gonna share the, I can share the agenda on the screen if that's helpful for folks.
I'm trying that again. Adrian, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't hear you, so I'm gonna work on that.
All right, I'll talk again and see if you hear us, Katie. I assume other people can hear me, just not Katie. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We heard you there. Yep. Did you hear us?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, excellent.
Thanks for your patience. I was just in another meeting on another platform, and I don't know if any of you experienced this, where you go from one platform to another and your computer doesn't know how to make sense of that sound. Adrian, how are we doing? Should we go ahead and get started, or should I give it another minute?
Yeah, I think we can get started. I was going to offer to share the agenda on the screen. Would that be helpful, at least to start us off, so we know what we're doing here? Or
yeah, okay. Go ahead. That would be great. I will just welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Katie Pratt, and I am with the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution. I've seen many of you on a past meeting, so it's lovely to be here again today. I'm helping to facilitate the conversation today on behalf of all of you, and look forward to having a good conversation in these times that are very much changing. The ground's kind of shifting underneath our feet. So I'm hoping that by the end of these 2 hours, we can make sense of what we know and what we don't know and where we are. So Adrian has the agenda on the screen, but I'll just read through it. So a little bit of welcome and introductions here this morning and some tone setting. And then we'll hear next from the DHS team a little bit about what we know about what has changed at the end of the legislative session, and hear sort of an explanation of what happened with the legislation. Then after that, there's really just time for discussion, question and answer, hearing from all of you what's on your mind, and then closing out with making sure you all know where to go and how to stay in touch with updates, because we won't have all the answers today, and the ability to keep in touch. So that's great. I think as we go, feel free. I will be watching for hand raised, or you can unmute yourself and contribute a comment or a question. So feel free to jump in when you have a chance. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Colin to give a couple thoughts. And Colin, you may be a new face for some people, so go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'll turn it to you.
So much, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to join with you all today. Uh, Typically, we would have our assistant commissioner, Natasha Mers, at this meeting, but she recently left her role, and we are still waiting for our next assistant commissioner to be appointed. I'm the Aging and Disability Services Administration's Chief Administrative Officer, handle our business operations here. So I'm filling in for that role for this meeting. So I appreciate all of you having me for this conversation and look forward to the next few hours. Like Katie was saying, we wanted to create some space at the beginning of this meeting. I really wanted to make a few comments on behalf of the staff here at the Department of Human Services related to the recent events impacting Senator John Hoffman and his family. We all are feeling a deep sadness following those events. As you all know and have personally experienced, Senator Hoffman has been a champion for people with disabilities and their families in Minnesota. His work has been guided by an unwavering commitment to inclusion and dignity that has made a lasting impact across so many lives in our state. Many of us here, including myself, have worked closely with him, some of you maybe for years. And we feel a personal connection to him and the work that he has so passionately done. This is a difficult time for everyone, we know, and we want to send out our hope for his full recovery and for his family. So we wanted to kind of create a space at the beginning of this meeting. If anyone else wanted to make any comments, express how they're feeling about these events. We know it impacts a lot of folks, and so just wanted to create that space. And if anyone wants to share any thoughts, please feel free to raise your hand and do so. And there's no right way to go about this. So if you don't want to share any thoughts at this moment, that's totally appropriate too. But just wanted to open that up for anyone.
Go ahead, Sue.
I'll just share a few things. I too share the deep sadness and appreciate the position it puts you in as well. I wanted to say that I held an all-employee meeting that was pre-scheduled last week, and I took the opportunity to speak and address culture and the divisions that cause these kinds of events to sometimes happen. And I feel that if we don't discuss it openly with our staffs, I felt a personal responsibility and an ethical responsibility, especially with Senator Hoffman and the murder of our dear Speaker Emerita. If we don't speak about it, these things will continue. So I just want to encourage everyone to feel it and to share it with anyone you know.
Thank you, Sue, for that reflection. Just giving a little space while people are letting thoughts come into their head. Go ahead, Charlene.
I think it's so devastating. We don't know really what to say, I'm guessing, right off the bat. But my condolences to all of you who worked with or knew Melissa, and hopefully Senator Hoffman and his wife can recover wholly. So just well wishes at this moment.
Just a comment in the chat from Zania that words cannot express the sadness I and we all share about what has transpired. I think that's so eloquent. Lovely. And you know, to Colin's point, we don't have to have the right words now. You know, I think in my office, we're oftentimes encouraging people to take the pauses that they need to process and sit with the feelings and sit with the uncertainty and to just accept the feelings as they come and not judge them, just notice them and observe what's going on. So this is obviously going to be a part of the conversation for months, if not years to come in our state. Great. Well, I think we can move on to our next agenda item, but certainly if thoughts come to you later in the meeting or when we're in discussion, you can jump in as well. So with that, I will turn it next to
Curtis, I think, right? Curtis is going to
yes.
just do a quick, and then turn it to Charles for more detail, I think. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Curtis Buman here. I'm a manager in Disability Services Division, and I've been with the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee since the beginning. I was just looking up some documents this morning of trying to get this coordinated back in 2021, so I've been here for the long haul. Couple of things to start with. First, as Adrian was reminding me, we were working to have some legislators, potentially Senator Hoffman, at this meeting before the tragic events. And, you know, we obviously, I'm struggling, I'm getting a little emotional here, but it would have been nice, but we're in a different world today. So appreciate your patience with us. There were some major changes coming out of the legislative session that Charles Young, our legislative lead, is going to talk about in a moment. But just to make sure you're aware, a couple of those. One is that we're required to stand up a Waiver Reimagine task force by, I think, November. And with that standing up of that task force is the sunsetting of the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee. So, you know, this is going to be the last meeting of the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee. And my role today is to start. And it's my privilege to say thank you for all that you've done over the years with this. Some of you have been here with me for the long haul. Just a couple of quick thoughts before I turn it over to Charles. This is a major reform project. And with that, it brings the potential for substantial gain as well as substantial risk and disruption. And you all have been so engaged in the process. It's been humbling on a regular basis for me, and I think I can say for staff too, as we try to understand and engage with you in this process. But every bit of feedback has been so helpful. As we move into this new chapter, and you know, as we sort out what the next steps are in this journey, you know, some of you may be interested in participating in this task force that's going to be stood up. Many of you won't be able to or won't want to, but I'm hoping that all of you remain engaged. The feedback you've given us has been so helpful. The concerns, the fears that you have, you need to keep sharing those with us and be asking the hard questions. How will your concerns be addressed? You should expect information. If you're not getting the information you need, you should demand it. And I hope you do stay engaged. This is entirely dependent on your ongoing engagement and the community's engagement. So again, I just want to close out by saying thank you, and try to stop before I get too emotional here. It's been a long, very interesting and learning journey. So, and it's not over yet. So thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Really appreciate it. And with that, we'll turn it over to Charles.
Good morning, everybody. I am Charles Young, the Legislative Coordinator for Disability Services Division. I don't think I've been on this side of an advisory committee meeting since the very beginning, so it's definitely been a while. Good to see you all today. Curtis really gave an overview of some of the big changes that will affect this committee here. I'm going to be walking through the legislation today. There are a couple other changes pertinent to Waiver Reimagine, and as noted, some of you might transition over to that task force and then have a role as we plan for some of the changes to Waiver Reimagine that occurred this past session. And to my understanding, the agenda for these meetings are put together well in advance. And while that was being done, we didn't really know what kind of session we were going to have or a special session was even going to occur. I can say that, and I know many of you were engaged in the process as well, and even testified this session in Senator Hoffman's Human Service Committee. He held a hearing on Waiver Reimagine. Ultimately, the regular session ended without a budget in place for human services. We did have a policy bill that did pass during regular session, but we needed a budget bill as this was a budget session. And again, as many of you know, that special session did occur. We actually did have that one-day special session. Again, much thanks to Representative Hortman and Senator Hoffman too, when it came to the Human Service Omnibus bill. So without the work of Representative Hortman, we might still be waiting for a special session as this fiscal year was about to end. That special session did occur on June 9th. It was a one-day special session. The Human Service Omnibus did pass. And within that bill, and it's a very large bill, we've got these changes to Waiver Reimagine. Katie, I'm wondering if I can share my screen. I'm just going to pull up the legislation. I'm also going to put the link in chat for those people on the WebEx side of things. I know that's going to be hard for those tuning in via YouTube. But right now I'm trying to pull up First Special Session Laws, Chapter 9, which is ultimately our Human Service Omnibus bill. For those of you in the WebEx committee, I'm actually sharing the House file for this. I find until later on in session when the revisor has updated more things, it's a whole lot easier to search through the House file than the session law. But ultimately, it's the same language. There can sometimes be changes to some of the line numbers, however. And I'm wondering if you're able to see my screen now. Sure. So I've got 4 parts to this omnibus bill that we'll be sharing here today. As Curtis mentioned, one of the biggest changes really is the repeal of this advisory committee, and almost kind of a transfer to an advisory task force. There are a few differences between advisory councils and task force in Minnesota Statutes 15, Chapter 15. One of the interesting things about task forces is that they are typically time limited to about 2 years, but the Waiver Reimagine task force here has no expiration, and that's specifically called out in the legislation. But one of the things that you'll notice, and I've got pulled up here, I'm looking at Article 2, Section 29 of, again, it's First Special Session 2025, Chapter 9. And you see a very long list of members. And it starts with legislators. And so that's one of the biggest changes between the advisory council and the task force is just the membership in general. The task force that is to be assembled by November Many of the members will have to be appointed by September 30th, which is a very quick timeline for the appointing of some of the members here. But this task force will have 4 legislators that are going to be appointed. One of the appointees will be appointed by the Speaker. Another is meant to be appointed by the DFL leader. That's in the House. Then on the Senate side, we've got a member appointed by the Majority Leader and another appointed by the Minority Leader. And then there is some overlap going down farther in the list between this council and the task force. We've got individuals receiving waiver services should be included. We've got some county employees that are to be included. Of course, DHS staff, Minnesota Council on Disability staff, disability advocacy organization staff, family members of individuals receiving services, and then, of course, provider members as well. So it's a very large task force, which is also kind of differs from the statute on task forces, because typically a task force is limited to 15 members within statute, but this group will be a little bit larger. As Curtis noted, the first meeting deadline is November 30th. Many of these members will be appointed by the governor through the Secretary of State process, to my understanding. That can be a lengthy process sometimes. That has to be posted, and people will have to apply through that process unless they're appointed by those other authorities that are called out here. I was told a long time ago not to scroll too fast when you're presenting because it can cause a little whiplash for members. So just going down slowly. There are also some differences between compensation when it comes to, between advisory councils and task forces. Probably not a big deal here, but again, expenses are reimbursed just a little bit differently. Task forces typically don't have a daily stipend, for instance. They can only be they can only expense expense reimbursement for things like travel or stay.
Charles, can I interrupt
Go
you
ahead.
for 1 second? I see a hand raised.
Yeah.
Jennifer, go ahead and jump in with your question.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering if I was able to ask questions or if we were waiting to the end, because I would like to ask questions before we get too deep into there. So if you wanted to scroll back up and on the whole huge list of who is supposed to be part of this task force, my question is, why was there not a requirement to have tribal representation? Why is that left out? That should be a requirement.
You know, I think that's a great question. I actually, if I recall, that feedback was brought up during session, but ultimately wasn't included in the final omnibus bill.
And do you know why? I find that discrimination.
I wouldn't have the answer to that. That was ultimately up to the authors about what was included or what edits were made. I don't know if anybody else on the DHS side has more info, but
Charles,
ultimately we would go ahead.
Could you share, just so everybody knows, who the authors of this piece of legislation were, if you know that?
Oh yeah, well, of course, that's all part of the story with Senator Hoffman as being one of the chairs of the Human Service Committee. And then there were also authors on the House side then as well. And over in the House, many might remember there was a power sharing agreement with both sides. And so ultimately, there were 2 members on the House side. It was Shoemaker, and all of a sudden I'm blanking, was Noor at one point.
Got it.
Yeah. It's also very hard to say with omnibus bills who the ultimate authors are, because they are an assembly of many other bills with many other authors. When it finally comes down to it, ultimately it is typically the chairs of each committee that author the omnibus bill, and others can sign on from there then as well. But we have many bills included in this final omnibus bill from regular session then as well.
And I just saw there's a comment in the chat from Zania that in the last meeting it was requested to have tribal representation, and she says this oversight is unacceptable.
And you know, this is a great point as we look to future sessions and planning. I know many of you might wish to advocate for further changes down the road. At this point, the advisory committee and the language here is set in stone until next session when legislators can revisit it. So that is something that could be revisited in 2026. Any other questions?
I don't see other hand raised right now.
Sure. Interestingly enough, again, I'm just scrolling to the end. This section was effective the day after enactment. The governor did sign these last week, maybe a little bit longer now. Time is a bit different after session. So technically this language is in effect, which means at this point, DHS can start planning and looking for the members and planning on the assembly of the task force among all others that are going to be involved. And then the language around the expiration date is also here in subdivision 6. For those of you following along, it's line 60.29. The next thing we wanted to point out is that there were some changes made to Waiver Reimagine in general then too. So things that the task force will be addressing. The first change, and now I'm moving on to section 73 of Article 2. For those of you following along at home too, this is line 93.6. This makes changes to Waiver Reimagine Phase 2, and it establishes an effective date for Waiver Reimagine Phase 2 of January 1st, 2027, or upon federal approval, whichever is later. And so this gives that target date for Waiver Reimagine changes. But the language goes further to ensure that costs of home care nursing be included in the individualized budget methodology created under Waiver Reimagine Phase 2 as well. So that's a substantial change that DHS and of course the task force will be working through as we look towards implementation. So going down just a little bit further, wanted to point out some changes to the online planning support tool, or sometimes known as the portal. That is to be created alongside Waiver Reimagine. The change further on in line 94.12 dictates that the online support planning and tracking tool be ready by July 1st, 2026. And there's also some just additional details around what must be included in the online support planning tool here. All of this language is also effective the day following final enactment, so is technically in effect now. We are so close to the next fiscal year. Many of you that are following other parts of the omnibus bill or other bills from other departments might already know, but budget bills typically go into effect the next fiscal year if no date is listed under enactment. In this case, of course, we have this date, but we are coming up to the beginning of the fiscal year. For those unfamiliar, July 1st is the beginning of Minnesota's fiscal year. And so unless otherwise stated, all provisions in a budget bill do go into effect on July 1st. So the very next one, for those of you that are looking for the language then as well, and again, I know many of you are instrumental up at the legislature this year and were following along. There were different versions of the language around the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee and the potential end date. Where you can find it now, for those of you that are looking for it, is actually in the repeal section. Many things are oftentimes hid, not intentionally, but within the repealer section of each article. If you look at the repealer for Article 2, you'll see at the very last subdivision, subdivision 3, that 2 laws are repealed, and both of them have to do with Waiver Reimagine. The first is looking at the repeal of the committee, and then we've got some language, I believe, around the online support planning tool as well. And I'm going to pull it up. Luckily, within most omnibus bills, we can see the language that was repealed then as well. Looking back at Session Laws 2021 for Special Session Chapter 7, Article 13, Section 75, Subdivision 3 was repealed in that repealer section, that is the language around the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee. So again, the intention being that the committee would sunset and the task force would take over many of those duties. We also had some changes around that online support planning tool that transferred elsewhere within law and statute then too, that were ultimately repealed. So there are a lot of changes actually within the omnibus bill, not necessarily directed at Waiver Reimagine, but will of course make changes to the waivers. We're not hitting any of those up today, but we will deliver other summaries through our e-list process then as well as some more online webinars. But we wanted to bring these to your attention today as we talk about the next steps for the advisory committee and the upcoming task force.
Thank you so much, Charles. We can dive into questions now, but I just wanted to, from your vantage as working in the legislative process, I think it might be helpful to give a little bit of context when a piece of legislation is passed and finalized. And I believe I don't follow this process or this particular bill, but it seemed like maybe there were changes even happening at the very last minute. And where do you go from here? I mean, it's not like legislation is crystal clear all the time of exactly what needs to happen next. And there might be room for interpretation on some points. Maybe just talk about the phase that comes after the passage of language like this.
Yeah, this is always I don't want to say necessarily the most difficult part of session, but sometimes we are left interpreting what the language means. Every department deals with the same issues, I think, after session. Sometimes we're given laws that are very explicit, black and white, and we have our direction. And sometimes the laws are pretty vague, and we have to interpret them as we see fit. If that interpretation is questioned down the road, then other members or public members can go to the legislature asking for additional clarification. But typically, once an interpretation by a department is made, that's the one that has to stick until there are future legislative changes down the road. Ultimately, all departments have kind of a minor role within the legislative process. We do make recommendations to the governor for any legislative proposals. The governor makes those recommendations to the legislature, but then it's ultimately up to the legislature to pass their final laws. Then it's up to the governor whether he's going to sign something he disagrees with. Either he's got to make that known within the negotiation phase or through the veto process then too. We play an advisory role during session, and so we're there within every committee hearing should there be questions for DHS. We do provide feedback to legislators then as well in real time during the legislative process, but they don't always have to take the feedback of departments. And so it can be a mixed bag whether or not that feedback will be taken then too. After session is passed, it's up to the departments to implement the language as written. So oftentimes what could happen, again, not necessarily speaking to this one directly, but there could be language that department, the governor opposed, but nevertheless, the department is required to implement after session anyways. So ultimately, we're kind of beholden to that legislative and the laws there. So that's where we're at right now, is going through each of these sections of the budget and policy bills and determining how they're going to be put forward and enforced or implemented.
That's great. Thanks for that context. Perfect. Well, we will open it for questions and discussion now. I see a couple hands raised. I'll try my best to get them in order. So we'll start with Trisha and then go to Kelly and Mary next. So Trisha, go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Katie. I'm actually going to defer to Kelly first. She might have the same question or more. And if not, I will leave my hand up and go next.
Perfect. Sounds good. Kelly, take it away.
All right. Thank you. I'm Kelly Friesen. I'm the mom of a young adult who has autism. And my question is, I'm just looking over the language. We kind of skimmed over that kind of quickly, but I see in statute 60.26 that this committee is supposed to create a report to give to the new legislative task force. And so my question is, how are we as a committee going to create that report if this is our last meeting? I'm kind of confused why we're sunsetting this committee prior to getting work done if this new legislative task force isn't going to really be up and running for a while.
Anybody want to take that question?
I wonder, Charles, if we could point out that language. I don't have the language in front of me to react to.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now. And one of the things that I didn't necessarily hone in on was that the original law back in 2021 also required a report from this committee. This portion of the current law does require that that report is still created and then presented to the task force so that they can ultimately carry on the work from this committee. That is going to be one of those logistical questions that we're, I think, going to all have to parse out. How does this work get done, considering the expiration date of the committee?
And to clarify, was the expiration date of this committee somewhere in this bill or this law? Why did we decide to end today? Is my question.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I think I also failed to point that out. The effective date for the repealer, and I'm pulling that up right now too, can be found in line 107.13. That does give the effective date of July 1st, 2025. If no date was given, it would have been July 1st, 2025 anyways, because that is the beginning of the fiscal year. But this does specifically call out that all these portions of law or statute are repealed as of July 1st. So next Tuesday.
And I'll just respond to say, thanks for clarifying, Charles. This is a reference to the report required in the statute that's established the RAC initially, I believe. And it is our intention to create that report. Well, I frankly, I don't have that initial language in front of me now. We just have to figure out how to accomplish that. I assume that we would be sharing that with RAC members so that you're aware of that, what that report looks like as part of a generalized transition over the course of the summer and fall before the Waiver Reimagine task force is initiated. But yeah, apologies. I didn't go back and look at the details of the report requirements ahead of the meeting, so I don't have them in my head right now. But I believe it to be a summary of the recommendations provided and what happened in the meetings we've held over the course of 3+ years. I don't know, Kelly, if that answers your question.
It sort of does. I guess the only concerning thing I'm hearing out of that is it sounds like a report's going to be presented to us by email. So we're really not going to have any teeth or ability to add to that report. And if we're truly making this a Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee report, you really shouldn't be involving all the members. So I guess that's a little concerning to me. I've been on this since the beginning too. And, honestly, I still would love to know what exactly this committee has done or been allowed to suggest about Waiver Reimagine, because the only thing I can say is that I know we named the 2 waivers, which were already put in place prior to this committee even starting. So I'm just concerned about, we're just going to pass this baton to a new group that doesn't even know the history of what's been going on, and things are just going to move forward without true involvement from the people that are the boots on the ground and the over the 70,000 people that are going to be affected by this. So just expressing my concern and hope we can somehow get people's true involvement that are being affected.
Thank you, Kelly. And that's excellent feedback. I suspect, and we'll have to go back with the team and look at this, but that there's got to be a way to do what you're saying, and we'll work on that. I can think of a number of pathways forward, but I'd rather not just randomly spout out solutions here. But that's excellent feedback. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll go next to Trisha.
Thank you. And thanks, Kelly, for bringing that up. So I'm not sure if everyone knows, but there were chairs that were elected to help this be more of a collaborative process. And because of the legislation, I understand it doesn't make a lot of sense to start with a whole new approach to how we go forward for one meeting. However, I think it was quite an oversight to not think about how those who've stepped forward and were elected, such as myself, could help in this process of writing that report or making this warm handoff. So I think that that's definitely something that should be considered in an effort to, really look at why this legislation was brought forward. I think it was a lot of frustration with this not being a collaborative process. And how can we best make it one? How can everyone who, is going to be impacted or their communities be present at the table? Again, Jennifer brought up, that's something that needs to happen, that we need tribal representation to make this a collaborative process. So I just would really encourage DHS to start now and think about how we can do that before it'll set the tone. If we can really have the RAC's hard work have an influence to set the tone for collaboration and partnership as we move forward, on improving the waiver system in Minnesota, I think we should do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. We clearly need to think about how we'll use RAC members in this transition. We'll have to go back and think about that some more. But excellent feedback.
That's great. We'll go to
a lot of us also have really good ideas about how to do that. So again, just saying to try to just shift the perspective here a little bit and think about how we can partner in creating this differently, versus the hi we're DHS, we're going to go figure it out, we'll do it for you, and then we'll ask for your feedback.
Well, and maybe this might be, and we can huddle on this, but a way to use the tri-chairs or the committee more generally to help us navigate the report and the handoff to the task force. Is that kind of what you're suggesting? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, you're right. This is the same thing I've been preaching since I've been a part of the RAC, is let's do this together.
Yep.
Let's be equal partners in figuring it out. And I know that's a difficult shift for large systems work. But I think we've all shown we've been pretty patient through it, and we just want to be a part of it. We want to help. Thank you.
You certainly have. Yep.
Great. Let's go to Mary next.
Well, I guess I would just like more information about the genesis of this whole idea. I mean, we have talked on and on about frustrations within this committee, but with Katie Pratt, with you coming on your group, it looked like we were moving in a more positive direction, and I don't know, I was getting re-enthusiastic about what we were doing here. Why, where did this come from that people decided it would be better to have really a much more, there have been criticisms about what is our involvement and, how do we interact with DHS? Now we really have this top-down arrangement with 4 legislators, other organizations. How did this come to be? And maybe people on here don't know the answer to that question, but I'm perplexed.
Thanks for raising that question, Mary. Does anybody have insight?
This is Charles again. I don't have a whole lot of insight. I can at least offer that this was not part of the governor's package that was brought forward this year, and so it did come from the community at large or legislators themselves.
This is Tricia, and
Go ahead.
I don't know, Kelly, if you want to articulate some of the answer to that. I was hoping that VHS could explain their version of why this came about, because I'm curious to hear what DHS thinks about it. I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire community that brought this forward. Kelly's always much better than I am, but I'll give a second for anyone else to respond if they would like to.
This is Kelly Friesen. I know one of the biggest asks many community members had was that we base our budget on needs and not the location and where people live. So I do know there was a group working on that to bring legislation forth on that. And unfortunately, that did not pass. So, you know, I guess my big concern or thought is maybe legislators are being asked to be involved because they need to be a part of this process. They're the ones that are going to be ultimately voting on the bills, and they need to understand it. So, you know, in my mind, it actually does make sense to have them involved. But at the same time, you know, we do need to have people that are feeling it and living it, and our waiver recipients be a part of it. So that's what I know of it. And I just pray that the work we've done is going to move forward and continue. And I like Trisha's suggestion of the tri-chairs being involved with whatever report or whatever handoff you get, because otherwise this last 3 years, it'll be all for nothing. And that would be very concerning to me.
And if I could add, Mary, I hear your frustrations. It seems like, what the heck are we doing here? This doesn't seem like something we would want. There have been several community members, waiver recipients, and their families, as well as professionals in the community who were very troubled by feeling like members of the RAC weren't being heard for a very long time. And as you may know, several of us did testify in some of those hearings or meetings about, you know, what it is that's happening. And then it comes to like, oh, well, the legislature hears that maybe this isn't an ideal process, but then it's like, well, what are we going to do about it? And as Kelly said, one of the big things was we've been saying, you know, we find this very problematic that it's based on where a person lives, not on what they need. Unfortunately, that language did not make it through, but also the process and were we truly being, heard and looked to as partners. And there was much discussion that I wasn't privy to, but people smarter than me decided that this task force would be more effective in being able to have some teeth and make you know, have some influence over what happens before it happens. That's my limited understanding of it. I also know that I've learned a lot through being involved in this advocacy work, that a lot of things happen behind closed doors. It all relies on the interpretation of the legislators many times. And so just being able to really explain and convey how we feel the you know, what the community needs and how those needs will best be met, it's important to speak to our legislators so that they can make informed decisions as well. If anybody has any questions about anything I've said, I'm happy to try to clarify. But that was my best understanding of how this entire exhausting process has gone.
So just to pause and summarize what I'm hearing, and then I want to get to the other hands that are up. It sounds like, you know, Mary, your question, you know, why this? Why sunset one process and reformulate and start in another process? And it sounds like in part it was generated out of some concerns that RAC wasn't meeting the needs of the dialogue and the deliberation that needed to happen, and it wasn't headed in the right direction. So some concerns there. How exactly the task force was landed on in this particular format and this particular way. It sounds like there's maybe not a clear-cut answer among the minds gathered here today. I can just share my office is named in the legislation as convening the task force. I don't know fully what the intent of that is, and I had no idea until the very last minute that my office was in there. So it wasn't transparent from my end. I didn't get a heads up like, hey, by the way, you're going to do this thing. So yeah, there isn't full transparency, I think, in how that, and that's common with legislative, processes that I've seen. We don't always know all the variables that go into what comes out at the end of session. And maybe more insights will come forward as time goes on. And again, one of the people that we had hoped to be here today, or the DHS team had, was Senator Hoffman. And, we're also, I think, grappling with that gap in our knowledge and our understanding and our guidance as this moves forward. Great. Okay. Well, I see Lisa, Jennifer, and Pat. So Lisa, you're up next.
All right, thanks. Good morning. So yeah, I'm liking and agreeing with what Tricia, Kelly, Mary, what all of you are saying. So Lisa Everett, I'm a parent of an adult that's been using waiver services for at least 20 years. I've been on this committee from day one. So a couple things. So one, going back to what was coming out of the legislature, is it also a chair or a seat at the table is going to be the disability voice advocate? Isn't there going to be at least one member from that group? And maybe Charles, do you know that? Or anybody offhand know? But I thought that might have been a new member.
I'm looking at this is Charles again, sorry. I'm looking at the language now. We do have 4 individuals under age 65 receiving disability waiver services. I'm not just looking through this real quick, seeing specifically a voice advocate. Is that the question?
Yeah, well, it's the DIVA group, as they're known. So it's an advocacy group called Disability Voices, or Disability Voice Advocates. Kelly, do you know quick off, aren't they named as being a seat at the table with this task force?
I have not heard that. I
No?
think, no, I'm trying to look through right now who the suggested task force members is. I need to actually get to Charles, can you tell me in the statute what exactly where that information is? We can all look at it then. Like
Yeah,
the
you bet.
different
And pull it up.
participants.
Yeah, no problem at all. It is Article 2, Section 29 of the session law, and I'm looking at line 58.10. It's Section 29. Again, there are 4 members of our individuals currently receiving disability waiver services. Further down, looking at line 58.28, there are 2 representatives of disability advocacy organizations appointed by the governor. So those organizations aren't specifically called out, but that is maybe the heading that you were thinking of then too.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking that was a new piece, or I'm just calling that out, that would be a difference than who comprise the Waiver Reimagine committee. But the reason I ask and bring that up is just to tie back to the history of how did we get here and why are we sunsetting. So I think, my understanding as I've followed this again from day one is you look at March of 24 and March of 25. There was testimony brought forward to the DHS committee. Hoffman and Abler were certainly part of that, as others were that heard that. And then that group, the advocacy group referred to as DIVA, also part of that. But I mean, just reflecting back, it's clear, as Tricia and Kelly have pointed out, that the collaboration and teamwork, if you will, of RAC has never been where it should be. And so those frustrations kept moving forward. And keeping in mind, RAC members, all of our meetings are for public viewing and they get viewed, and there's a lot of people that watch what we're doing and they'll cheer us on in some capacity, but they feel our frustrations in others. And they have taken their voices forward outside of RAC. And that's what led to a lot of that testimony. And it was powerful. And so in the end, I don't know. I'll say it this way, but it's probably too harsh. But I think RAC is viewed by many outside of here that we're going nowhere fast, and that's because of that lack of collaboration. So that's my 2 cents of why this task force is now being created, because you're going to get people at the table that can actually get something done and listen to all players. So I think that's the hope anyway. And yeah, so again, it's very unfortunate that we put our efforts into establishing tri-chairs that won't be really implemented in the end, but it would be great to use their voice going forward, if not all of our voices. So that'll lead to my last question is it say anything thus far that the new task force members, are they actually directed to start fresh with ideas, or are they actually directed to pick up where we've left off, or is that just kind of a gray area?
This is Charles again, and looking at the language, I would have to say that does look like a gray area. There is expected to be that handoff within the report itself. And of course, many members might, from this committee, might make up that task force as well, which would help with a handoff, I think, then as well, if that does occur. But other than that, I'm not seeing a specific language, but many of the duties of the committee do overlap, or I'm sorry, of the task force. I have to get my own language straight sometimes here too. Do overlap with those of the committee.
Charles, if I may, I would just tack on to that. Certainly, Lisa, my hope, having very little control over this, is that the work of the task force would build off of the work that this group has done, while keeping in mind that there are going to be many additional perspectives blended in with that task force. You can look at the list of folks on that task force. We tried our level best with the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee to focus and center the perspectives of people who receive services and their families. There are other perspectives joining the conversation at this point. Some of them have a lot of clout in the system. So I think that's something y'all may want to consider and be thinking about in how you engage with legislators and others as this process goes forward. I think I hope that made sense. Please ask me to clarify if it didn't.
Lisa, I could just add, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in the end, reflecting back on what others have said, Kelly, Tricia examples, if all RAC members are not included in some kind of summary report, it just completely amplifies the reason that we're being dissolved, which is that we cannot collaborate. And that's just an epic failure, and I hope that does not happen. So every member on this committee is here for a reason and has a voice and has a purpose, has a message, has a deep founded meaning of why they're on this committee. And for once and for all, before we sunset, please listen to us all.
Great. Okay. I will turn it next to Jennifer.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to discuss kind of the same thing everybody's kind of been saying. I do share the same views and concerns and everything like that. But I do want to point out, because this advisory committee, what it is comprised of, the individuals that we have in this committee, is not the same as what this task force is looking for. And I can't remember who said it. I'm sorry if I sorry, the boots on the ground, right? That needs to be a priority when we're looking at this task force, because there's so many times that policy, actually all the time, that policy is written, legislation has changed when we're not asking and taking input from the boots on the ground, the people that it's affected, the programs that it's affected, the organizations that it's affected, the providers that it's affecting, and seeing how will that affect them. And that needs to be taken into account. And I feel that with the I don't even know how many, almost 15, 20 people listed on here, or groups to be on this task force. Really, when you look at the RAC committee compared to the new task force, I mean, not even a quarter of us could be included into the new task force when you look at it, because the numbers aren't there, right? And then second of all, with the RAC and with Katie being brought in, which was a breath of fresh air, having Katie come in, because it's like, okay, she's here, she's kind of like our mediator, she's helping the state and us kind of work together, because it's not the RAC committee that is failing. The RAC committee is doing what we are here to do. We are bringing up our concerns, the barriers. It's the state that's not listening, that there are these barriers, and bringing the right people to the table to iron out those problems, to be like, okay, what are some of the changes that we need to make it better for the lives of the individuals who receive these services, or for the providers who provide these services, so we can expand services and things like that. So when Katie came on, I too got really excited about, like, oh yay, we're gonna start moving in the right direction. We're gonna have more collaboration, we're gonna have more communication, where it's like before it was DHS just, you know, it was no conversation when we had a committee meeting. It was just, we talked and they didn't have anything to respond. We had a question, they had nothing to answer. And then with the next meeting, they had still no answer. And so it wasn't that it was our fault that we didn't get anywhere. It was because we were bringing these concerns forward, but nothing ever came back to us in a response. And so if that part right there isn't changed with the task force, then we're just slapping a new name on it and doing the same thing. So I just wanted to put that out there, that those are my concerns with this task force. And I just really want to make sure that the boots on the ground people are involved with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Pat, thanks for your patience. Turn it over to you now.
Sure. Yeah, there's good discussion going on. When I first heard this, that we were going to be sunsetted, I thought, oh my gosh, all that work and now it's just gone. What was this all about? And yet, as I thought about it more, and as I'm listening to people now, I'm realizing that, you know, this is all an evolution from the very beginning, where, you know, it seemed there was this huge learning curve on, you know, how we were going to work together for the mutual benefit of, you know, talking and listening. And that, you know, took a while, but I felt like good things were happening. And I felt like that, you know, created the opportunity, you know, to go do testimony and whatnot, which thank you to the people that did that. And then I remember Senator Hoffman saying, well, you know, he had questions and said, well, Natasha, you know, maybe you can go to those meetings and, you know, find out what's going on and come back and tell us. So I think all of the pieces that have happened needed to be in place to get where we are now. And so I don't know, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I would like to think, like many people are saying, that this is the opportunity now to, you know, bring forward what we've been talking about, and just that we have gotten to a place where, okay, we're bringing the legislators in now. And I guess I had a question about, so are these legislators, like, do they volunteer for this position, or are they appointed? If these 4 legislators that are going to be here, yeah, that was a question that I had out of curiosity. Because it seems like,
Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, it just seems like, well, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, this is Charles again. Just thought I'd answer the question about how the legislators will be brought onto the task force, and they are to be appointed by by the speaker, another by the DFL leader over on the House of Reps side, and then on the Senate side we've got a majority and minority member, and they are appointed. Again, just going back to the tragedy with Senator Hoffman, I think we probably had every thought that Senator Hoffman would be one of those members that is appointed by November. And so, yeah, the legislature will now have to kind of make those decisions and how they're going to appoint people by the states.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I want to chime in one thing, and then I want to go to Polly next. Several of you have raised concerns about a new task force kind of starting, reinventing the wheel and not looking at any of the work that you've done. And I just wanted to share from a process standpoint, my office has helped with many different task forces, work groups, advisory councils, you name it. And I would say I've never seen a case where a group has convened and said, let's not look at any of the prior work that's been done on this topic. They almost always want to know and see what the discussion to date has been, because it helps them move forward more productively. So I don't know who's going to sit on it and what, how it's all going to be assembled and convened. But I can say just universally across groups that I've worked in, that is something I've seen. People are hungry to know what have been the prior discussions that have got us to this point. We want to really understand those so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so that we can take off and be productive. Great. Okay, so I want to go to Polly. Then I just want to pick up, there's been a few different comments in the chat. So I want to pick up on those, and then Trish, we'll get to you after we look at some of the comments in the chat. So Polly, go for it.
Hi, I'm Polly Owens, and I am here as a volunteer representing the ARC of Minnesota, and I'm also an independent support planner for people using the community-directed or consumer-directed community supports option of the waiver. There's just a couple of things. I've been here from the beginning too. I just want to comment that I feel like the work of the group has not gone forward, not because of a lack of cooperation, but because of a lack of focus and direction. And from the get-go, I thought an outside facilitation system would work best. So I too was looking forward to having outside facilitators so that everybody could be equal participants in the process. And I felt like when DHS was trying to facilitate, it was difficult for them to be equal partners in the process. In regard to the new task force, there's a couple things. I think it's important that, or I would recommend, if possible, the involvement of a parent of somebody who's under 18. I work a lot with young children, people under 18 who are using the waiver, and they're coming up through the system. Their viewpoints of things may be unique, and I think it's important that that representation is part of the task force. I also think that I've worked with DHS work groups and committees and task forces and whatever you want to call them for 40 years, okay? And I think that it would be really important for this task force, based on the nature of who's being assigned to it, that they have smaller work groups that supplement that task force to get the actual policy and procedural work done. Because based on the makeup of that group, it's going to be difficult for them to understand the ins and outs of how the waiver works, because it is, like somebody said, top heavy on the administrative side. So I think it would be important that within the structure that they look at work groups or small committees or something. We talked about that with this group too, because we did a lot of discussion, but really never came up with any substantive answers to things. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. Like I said, I'm going to jump into the chat for just a minute. There's a question about what does a warm handoff look like, or another way of saying that is, what is the transition? I think this has come up in a couple of different comments. What does the transition period look like? And I can just share, as I was talking with the DHS team getting ready for this meeting, that I think we don't know yet. And I believe, and I don't want to speak for DHS, but I believe that you all are very open to a collaborative way of figuring out what does that handoff look like? What does that transition look like so that it's meaningful? And Curtis, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with what you said, Katie. And just as some additional perspective for folks, this often happens at the end of session in a budget year, especially where we're like just awash in new legislation, and it can be very distracting, figuring out how you're going to stand up lots of different new things. So our bandwidth, so to speak, to think through exactly what the way forward and anticipate all questions isn't always what we would like it to be. So I apologize if we came off, or if I came off as being directive about how this transition would happen from RAC to the task force, and absolutely welcome your input and involvement in that process. So again, lots of opportunities to be humbled, and appreciate all of your input on this. So I see some hands up though.
Yes, a couple more things from the chat. One is there was a question about are those of us on this committee going to get first dibs on the new task force? I don't know if anybody has some insight on that.
Well, while Charles is looking that up, I think that legislation in almost all cases identifies who will be the entity appointing members, does it not, Charles? And I think only very few are from the commissioner of DHS, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. This language is pretty explicit in some spots that many of the members are going to be appointed by various bodies, organizations, or authorities. There are several positions, or many positions, that are going to be appointed by the governor here, and that process goes through the Secretary of State process. So if I can post a link to that for those interested in WebEx. For those following on YouTube, it's a little bit harder. But if you Google Secretary of State boards and commissions, you can find their information on how those open positions are posted.
And our plan has been in this process, while we're in this interim between RAC and this task force, until such a point as there is some information available directly from the task force in terms of how that will be, stood up, that we would share information with RAC folks on what's transpiring in that direction, keep you posted about developments. And again, we have very limited role in identifying new task force members, but just want to make sure that you're in the know. And that's where the warm handoff comes in, that we keep you up to date on what's going on until the task force people are ready to take over that job of communicating. One assumes that there'll be some official communication about, hey, it's time, people who are interested could apply to be on this task force. And one would assume that that would come from the task force, not from us. But we want to keep you in the loop while that transition is underway.
Great. Yeah, so just to reiterate, there's not currently, open positions posted, but, the intent is to keep everybody informed as those become available. And it will be a little bit of a process, since there are so many different appointing authorities. So there'll be some, various processes going on. One final thing from the chat, and then I'll get back to the hands, is just someone asked about the purpose of the new task force as opposed to RAC. And Charles mentioned that the duties of the task force are found on line 59.24, and it lists about 9 different duties. So I think that we won't dive into that right now, but I think that's a good, homework project for people to look at side by side, the RAC and the new task force, and see where those duties and those outcomes overlap or not. Okay, perfect. I think I got most of the stuff from the chat, so I'll jump back into the hands raised. I think Trisha, it was you, and then Kelly. So go ahead, Trisha.
Okay, just a few quick things. One, I have no idea why my hands kept clapping through It just kept going and going and going, so I apologize for that. Secondly, you know, with the Secretary of State appointment, I think in light of recent tragic events, we're starting to understand a little bit more about what that means. And we've learned that it can be people being appointed to task forces who, for various different reasons. I would hope that right now there would be heightened attention to actual qualifications, which I think many people on task forces have and have historically. That's not here nor there. But I think that it would only make sense that if someone has served on RAC and has inside knowledge of RAC, they would be some of the most qualified for that Secretary of State appointment on the task force. So I myself am going to be watching for that very closely because I think that's important, very important. The other thing is that when legislation was being drafted about what is it that's needed, is it another task force? Is it this, that, or the other? That a lot of people who've, worked at this level had said that a task force made up of these people will actually have power to make decisions. Because as we know, a lot of times the greatest ideas come from the community, but if you don't have any ties to the budget that could support those programs or policies, or you don't have the capacity to support those programs and policies in any way, the great ideas never go anywhere. And that was what I was told about this task force. And I've seen some good work out of task forces in our state. I am hoping that that will include having some real influence, having some real power, and maybe breaking off into work groups or adding people into work groups. I don't know, but people who know what needs to be done will be at the table, not just the people who think they know. Thanks.
Thank you, Trisha. Kelly, what are you next?
Okay, thanks. Kelly Friesen. I guess just a thought or a comment too, as we are doing this report, I'm thinking back to the conversation we had in our April meeting. And again, I hate to keep bringing up this point of the foundational flaw that, currently our budgets are based on location of where a person lives and not on need. And we had this discussion again in April. And I remember somebody from DHS, I don't remember who it was, but there was a conversation about how DHS provides technical assistance to legislators when needed, okay? And so that language is gone. And part of from what I recall from the conversation, is part of DHS's technical assistance is letting legislators know what they can and cannot do. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm going to ask, and I'm going to actually really hope that DHS will come forward now with technical assistance and be a voice of this group. And as part of your report that you're going to be writing, please add this foundational flaw that Waiver Reimagine cannot be based on just where a patient or person lives, because we're going to end up driving more patients or people into institutions if they don't have the budgets to stay in the community. And we all know that keeping people in the community costs less, because we had that report that was written for us that actually helped create the whole thought process that it would be best to have two waivers based on location. It showed people, we save money when we keep people in the community. So I'm going to ask DHS to please put that in your report as the technical assistance, and please take input from this committee as much as you can, as far as trying to have a nice clean handoff and maybe involving some of the chairs, which we've already talked about, one of the tri-chairs. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, so I'll just pause and let people take a breath and think if there's anything they want to bring up. Well, people are thinking, I would just offer again sort of an observation from my experience in the facilitation world as you're moving through this transition process. And I've already offered to the DHS team that, you know, my office is available to help with this transition period. We're still all reeling from the last couple of weeks. It's been a very difficult time. And so what that looks like and how I personally will be involved, I can't say for sure yet. But one piece of just observation is what I hear in this conversation is there's kind of content questions and there's process questions right now. The content questions are about, you know, the substance of waivers and the, you know, the substantive issues that RAC was meant to deliberate on and that the task force was meant to deliberate on. And then there's process questions, and process questions are about how are we going to sunset one body and stand up a new body? Who's involved in that? What does that look like? What are the process elements, the structural elements, the decision-making elements that need to happen along those journey? And so, you know, one advice I have is just to think about those in kind of different columns in your brain. Setting up the best process helps get to the best content outcomes, right? So how do you make sure that you can have the best process elements in place so that you can eventually get to the really wise and thoughtful content solutions? Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just looking at the legislative report that you sent, Charles, and I'm so sorry. I just wanted to ask you a question because I see that there is also a long-term services and supports advisory council that is going to be created. And since this does tie into Medicaid waivers as well, and long-term services and supports does affect people of all ages, how will the task force and this new advisory council, well, I don't know if it's new or not, it just says it in there. How will they be working together since they will be working on similar goals?
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is Charles again, and yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't know if we have anyone here that will be working with the advisory committee, but I think we did understand as we were looking through the legislation that there may be some overlap between these two bodies with their work, and so that's going to be something to parse out in the upcoming months for sure.
Okay, and just moving forward, I know that we're running out of, you know, getting close to the end here, but I guess Kate, I don't know, or Curtis, if you guys are able to kind of keep us all in the loop on when, like, the long-term services and supports advisory council and the new task force, when they're going to be open to applicants, so we all can have our opportunities, whether to apply for both or one or the other, just so we can continue to have our voices out there, bringing our barriers, success, all that stuff forward to make a better change for the citizens of Minnesota.
Absolutely. Again, just to reiterate from my comments at the beginning, you all bring a lot of value to this process, and much of it, how shall I say this? It hasn't landed yet, but needs to land, right? And this task force may be a way to do that more effectively. Like I said before, I have some mixed feelings, as do you apparently, from the feedback we've gotten today about that task force. But stay engaged, insist on information, insist on having your voices heard. I'll stop there. I don't know, Katie, if you want to talk about the plan on the report.
Yeah, just a brainstorm idea here to bring up. So going back a little bit, changing gears on the topic, back to the report. And, you know, I heard several of you say, we want that report to be meaningful, for it to be collaborative and reflect all of our voices. And I'm just brainstorming an idea here. Would there be any interest in you all as RAC members co-authoring that report as potentially, now, especially as kind of, geared at the audience of the new task force? I see one head nod, but maybe people can either put a thumbs up or let me know somehow whether that idea is of interest, or if you have any concerns or feel like there's risk to that. I think I'm just thinking out loud here. I think this would be sort of a volunteer that would be self-organized by you all as members. And I'm seeing in the chat yeses. More yeses. If there are some dissenting views out there that are concerned about that, please, if you feel brave enough to share those, that's important to know if you're not all kind of in agreement with that approach. Okay. I'm seeing general support. And again, I'm just brainstorming and thinking out loud. I think one thing that could happen is there could be a report that's co-authored by the members, and then potentially if DHS had additional, things that they want to contribute from their perspective, or maybe their observations as an agency, that could be an addendum to the report or something like that. But I think we could probably figure out a structure there and a timeline for that to happen. Okay. I'm seeing thumbs up. If there's concerns that about sort of co-authoring a report that you didn't feel comfortable bringing up now, you can certainly email me or the DHS team and let us know. But it seems like that's potentially an actionable idea. So we'll put that in the notes, and then maybe you all can be thinking about next steps about how to self-organize and co-author a report. And, if you have an idea of how to make that happen, let us know. I think DHS is all ears to how that might work. Cool. Okay. Great. I'm looking for hands, or if there's anything I'm missing. Yeah, Kelly, go ahead.
Just to clarify, I love what you're suggesting. So you're asking if we'd like to be a part of the report writing, and I think that's fantastic. I guess if you're asking for suggestions, I'd say let's get a meeting together with this group, and maybe you can throw out some information ahead of time, or DHS can ahead of time, to say what are some things you want involved or as a part of this report, and then we could all come back and review it and maybe make some edits or changes at that time. Thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I would be curious, would this be something, Kelly, from your view, that you'd like to see, DHS putting meetings on the calendar, or can you all meet separately and sort of, perhaps this is a role where the co-chairs could convene the group without DHS? I'm just curious how you think it would work best.
Well, I think if we're looking at, again, the collaborative report, collaborative group decision making, I think we should all meet together. That would be my thought, because it is supposed to be a report from our group. So it'd be really difficult. I think if we're breaking off, that's kind of defeats the purpose of a joint collaborative report, right? So I guess I would ask that, yes, the DHS has the capability to send out meeting links like this, and it wouldn't, it could be voluntary. If people are like, no, I don't want to be a part of that, that's fine. But we saw enough yeses and enough thumbs up that I think you have committed people here that want to be able to have their voice heard, and with this handoff and the report. So that would be my suggestion. I think you'd get a fair amount of people interested. I know I would be.
And one more question, and then I'll get some more opinions. Kelly, do you think it would be helpful? You know, how do you see the drafting play out? Would it be, you know, you all kind of as non-DHS members taking a first stab at the draft, or you'd like DHS to come with something and then you chime in? What are your thoughts there?
I think we look at the legislative task force. I forget where it is exactly in this, again, the statute, but they have an agenda. They have to meet different criteria for Waiver Reimagine. And maybe we look at that criteria that was set out. We could all put in some information on what we've already worked on based on where they need to have their needs met going forward. And as far as how do we bring that together, in the past, DHS has even sent us out like emails and said, ask for input. We could get that out ahead of time, provide that input ahead of time. So when we come back to the meeting, it's meaningful time. And even if, like, I think somebody suggested in the chats, the triad chairs could speak for us. And that's fine too, if you wanted a smaller meeting, but somehow everybody's input has to be at least seen or looked at. My thoughts.
That's helpful. Pat, your hand is raised.
Yeah, there could be, I know for me, when I sit down and think of, you know, writing out all my comments and whatnot, and I imagine, you know, other people doing that and then pulling that together, I wonder if it doesn't make sense to, and I know we talked about, you know, getting together in a meeting and writing it together, but would it be possible to have some kind of like format in terms of, you know, and maybe some of us could submit questions that we think would pull together good information to pass on to the task force. And then, you know, maybe some people could look at those questions and see, well, which ones are, you know, combine the questions or whatever, because that seems like it would simplify maybe, I mean, not to standardize or, you know, cut people off if they don't, you know, if their responses don't necessarily fit in there. But I'm just thinking of a way to begin even sorting it out so that, you know, it wouldn't be this overwhelming task to put all these different opinions together in some kind of document. That's just something I was thinking of at the moment.
I appreciate, I appreciate that, Pat. And I do have some different experiences, again, from different processes I've been part of kind of co-creating documents like this. And exactly what you're talking about, Pat, I've used a format like that before, where you put out a few prompts, everybody submits their answers, and then, you know, an author or a couple authors do the work of synthesizing that into one document. So that's a tool. There are other tools for co-authoring documents. I will say that co-authoring can get very time consuming and detailed, where you're, you know, I've been part of a process where we have spent multiple hours wordsmithing, you know, like one paragraph, right? So,
right, me too.
So
that's what I'm thinking about.
Yes, exactly. And that's sometimes really important and needed in certain processes. And so we'll have to set some, you know, sort of boundaries around to what level of, you know, what level of co-editing people are going to do. And there's maybe some ways to work through that so that it becomes a manageable process, and, you know, something that people have bandwidth for.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Just another quick thought. This is Lisa Everett, parent of an adult on the waiver. Not sure where this is all going to go, because I don't know, with that July 1 deadline, I don't know how realistic anything can get done to have our voices heard, because that's a lot of voices. But a possibility would be, each RAC member write up your own summary and submit it to this new task force of what you think was and was not accomplished. And a great guide would be to refer back to the Waiver Reimagine charter and what our directives have been from day one. And you could use that as a guide of where did we have decisions made and where were things not done in our timeline. So possible point being, each member could write their own summary and send it to the new task force.
That's great. That's another sort of structure for passing along information. A little bit different than a co-written report, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive either. There could be a co-written report and individual reflections actually compiled within that. So yeah, lots of great ideas.
Katie, if I can just add to that, you know, as we continue this
it.
conversation, that occurred to me too as maybe one pathway, or maybe we have a combined pathway. But you know, I think it would be interesting to hear, to include the individual RAC members, you know, exiting comments and potentially include them in the report, potentially in addition to a shared document. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I don't know, Katie, if you're going to jump in with some thoughts about how to structure this. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Sorry, say your question again,
Chris. Or do you have some thoughts on how to structure this next stage of work with the report?
Here would be my thought. If the group was okay with this, I would be interested in leaning on the co-chairs during this time, and maybe the DHS team comes together and thinks about, you know, sort of a proposed structure based on what, you know, some of the capacity and some of the elements they're dealing with, meeting with the co-chairs then to refine that process and then move forward with the group collaboratively. And have I can't remember if the co-chairs, if the names of the co-chairs, it's actually tri-chairs, have those been sent out to the group? Is everybody aware of who the tri-chairs are?
I don't think that was ever announced. I apologize, but we got sidelined from with the legislation, right? And that wasn't formally announced.
Do you want to share that, Adrian?
Yes, I sure can. Apologies. I feel like I want to have more of a reveal. No, but the tri-chairs are Jennifer Ballinger and Trisha Brisbane and Pat Wright that were elected. Thank you, everyone. It was a close race, lots of great candidates, and but I'm happy to reach out, or we'll talk and figure out how we can. I'm listening to the conversation about how this would be coordinate our next steps with the tri-chairs.
Yeah, so that's right. So I think, you know, let's take a little time, process all the feedback we're getting here today, and come up with a structure that's doable and get the tri-chairs involved. Pat, is your hand up from before, or do you have a new question or comment?
I'm sorry, I hadn't taken it down yet.
No problem. If you could just keep continually clapping too, that'd be awesome. Like Tricia was. Kelly, go for it.
Okay, sorry. I just am super excited. This is the first time I've seen all of this legislative language, and budgets based on needs that are not tied to location of services is in the new language. I am super pumped about that. I'm sorry I misspoke. I did not know that made that in. So very excited. That'll be my big ask when I go ahead and make my recommendation to the report, is we actually follow 5928. So thank you, and I'll be quiet now. Thank you all for listening. I'm very excited about that.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, it takes time to digest all this legislative language, and it's not always straightforward and spread out in different places. So so that's great. Okay. Pat, I see your request that, you know, I think it would be helpful if an email could go out after this with the links to the legislation and also 9 points, you know, maybe just directing people to some of the different places where to find that information, such as the duties and the members and so on.
Yes,
That
please,
people can
yeah,
find.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Just to recap where we are, from my understanding, so we have a couple things on the table. One is the report, and one is just broadly the transition of sunsetting RAC and standing up a new task force. And that not all the details are crystal clear at this point, but there's a desire from DHS on the latter, on the kind of as the new task force gets stood up, to make sure you all are informed. And then with the report, developing and co-creating with the tri-chairs a process by which we can reasonably kind of craft a document together. Again, one that it represents the breadth of views on this group and sets the next phase of work in the task force up for success. That would be some things I think hopefully would come out of the report, as well as anything that's mandated to report on. I guess I don't know the answer to that. But this seems like doable next steps. And, you know, even with the formal RAC sunsetting on July 1st, I'm hearing still a willingness of many people to be involved in this transition phase. And that seems just wonderful. And I guess, you know, since the formal appointments will have ended, people can choose, you know, their willingness and their level of involvement that they want to take as the process moves forward. With that, maybe I'll turn it back to DHS team and anything else that you want the group to know in terms of next steps or closing out our meeting for today. And then we still have a little bit of time if anybody has any final questions or concerns.
Well, I'll just say thank you, Katie, for your work here over the last several meetings. And DHS team, I think what we'll need to do is circle around what is that structure that we'll need on this report conversation and try to get something back to RAC folks fairly shortly. I don't know, Adrian, if you have any thoughts on timing on that. I know we're all drowning in stuff right now, but
yeah, right. I mean, I haven't had a chance to give much thought, obviously, but I know that personally I'm around in July, so I'm not off next week, for example. So we can at least, if it looks like.
Adrian, just riffing with you a little bit to circle with a team and reacquaint ourselves with the core requirements of the legislative report that is to be created. Make sure that we gather the documentation that's in those requirements and frame that up for the RAC members so they don't have to do that legwork. So we have that all the grunt work all done. And it's something where they can, add to that as they determine best. And that's where if we can just kind of get that quickly sorted, I don't think that would be a lot of work, but we'll have to talk that through. I don't want to overpromise here in a meeting and then go, oh, wait, there's more to this than I thought. But I would hope that we could get back to y'all fairly shortly with that structure, and at least to start the conversation with how do you all want to structure your engagement on that.
Great. Any other final questions or comments from the group? I can say that I do not know Senator Hoffman personally, but I can only imagine that he's very proud of the work that you all are doing and carrying on despite all that has happened in Minnesota in the last few weeks.
I just wanted to follow up just real
Yeah.
quick, just to make sure. So we're gonna be sent an email of dates that the task force will be open to have applicants to apply for positions, and how that will be done.
That is correct. And based on my understanding, DHS team, correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be a little bit of lag time as that appointment process and those timelines get figured out. It might not be, it might not be right away, but as DHS learns more, to keep you all informed of what is open, what the next steps are, what is known. And I think too, if you have questions, Adrian, I understand, is a good point person. If you're just like, hey, what's going on with this? I haven't heard anything from a while. I know these transition processes that I've been a part of, they're oftentimes they're a little bit nonlinear sometimes. And so if you're just like, hey, what's going on? Why haven't I heard anything? Shoot Adrian an email. She'll do her best to get information back to you, and based on what's going on.
Okay, and then also, can we also, maybe I'm the only one who's interested, but just in case others are too, if we could get some information about the Long-Term Services and Supports Advisory Council, as that one looks like a brand new advisory council, because I think maybe some of us would also like to, or might be interested in joining that one as well. So if we could get some information on that one. For everybody, that's line 95.3.
Yeah, I'm looking to the DHS team. Maybe that information about the legislation goes, that goes into the email as well. And then I don't know if there's a point person in DHS or some staff member potentially, or I don't know.
I'm thinking as these things mature, as these new options mature, and processes and protocols and they have their own Adrians identified, that we can start pushing people in that direction. Here's where you go for that LTSS committee. Here's where you go for the task force, and making sure that people have links if there are websites or application processes, but then pointing people back to those processes as we move forward, so we won't add confusion. I hope that makes sense.
I would just urge you all to, again, having been through periods like this where there is a transition, there's new legislation, there's different bodies, there's different appointment processes. I would urge you all to just, as Curtis said, reach out, ask for the information you need. And at the same time, give a little grace and patience. It is just complicated. Like it tends to be a degree more complicated than it always feels like it needs to be. So a little bit of grace and a little bit of patience, but for sure speak up and ask for the information that you need. Awesome. Okay.
I just like to take this. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yeah, this is Art Della Hudson. I just like to take this opportunity to thank Adrian, and a couple of others, that was helping, me along this process. I've been with REC pretty much ever since it started. And I just like to give kudos out to those that helped me, and Adrian in particularly. And I won't hesitate to reach out, for help, with this new committee. Come in with this new committee. And I won't hesitate to call her, because I still want to remain a part, of this process moving forward. I still want to be a part of REC. And thank you. It's a lot. It's a lot and bit much information. It's a lot. And I still want to be a part. And Adrian, you still will be there for me?
Thanks, Arbadella. Yeah, yes, of course. I'll always take your call. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks for those kind words. Okay. Any other final comments? Otherwise, you'll get 10 minutes of your day back. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll all be in touch and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Have an awesome rest of your day, folks.
You too, Bella.
All right.